Joining me now in the studio, former advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley, and down the line we're joined by broadcaster and writer Edward Adoo. Good to see you both. Thank you so much. Edward, good to have you on the programme. I haven't seen you for far too long. Now, this is a story that has gone on and on, hasn't it? And I know with the first day we dealt with it on this programme, all my guests in the studio, in fact, were united, and all of them said, there's no discussion here. This money has to be returned. The Tories must return it. And when I said, and what if they don't, they thought it was so unconscionable, the very notion that they might not, that they barely even wanted to discuss it. So convinced were they, all these political pundits and experts, that the money would simply have to go back. Well, the money hasn't gone back, has it? So I wonder what you think about this now being the matter of a police investigation and what you feel about the response so far, Edward.
Well, the whole case is just disastrous. And the reason why I wrote an op-ed piece for The Voice, as soon as I heard what happened, it just made me think straight away of, well, my mum, aunties, relatives, and generally everybody, brothers and sisters within the black community, that it felt as if it was an attack. Because if those actions can be more or less endorsed or swept under the carpet, where we've been told continuously we need to move on, that will certainly spark, or it will be inflammatory to not just the black community, but to other faiths and races in the UK. When it comes down to the money specifically, it does make you think that, well, certainly if you are a donor and if you have power, then you can make those types of remarks and it will be excused. And I think it kind of certainly to a societal view, to say for what he said, more or less kind of endorsing it and saying, well, look, if you have power, you have money, you have status, you can say that. And it took a long time for the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, to come out and say, well, look, in actual fact, this is racist. All the ministers that were doing the rounds on that particular day on all the various TV channels refused to call it. I heard interviews from breakfast through till drive time, not on radio and TV. And when ministers were asked, do you think this is racist? All they kept on saying was, well, look, it's alleged for Mr. Hester to have said that. And then it took Kemi Badenoch, who kind of said, look, let's call it for what it is. And she said, look, I have, Diane Abbott, obviously Labour, regardless of the political allegiance here, what was said is wrong. And I think that's the issue. It took them a long time. And I think it's troubling for the Conservatives, because in 2017, 2018, I was called by, when Matt Hancock was digital minister, to be part of a panel to look into diversity. And obviously this was under the stewardship of Theresa May. So clearly the Conservatives back then were trying to make steps or measures to try and to make sure that the UK is representative of all communities.
All right, well, shed a bit of light on this for me, Edward. Shed a bit of light on this. So you're called by Theresa May's government in a capacity to attempt to encourage or to facilitate diversity. How do you do that? In what sort of sphere was it meant to be? And how did they envisage you helping to facilitate or bring about more diversity? What did you actually do?
Well, firstly, it was a discussion at a DCMS in Whitehall. There were lots of diversity heads, and it was more or less saying, look, what is happening now? How can we reflect the UK, or all the different sectors, broadcasting, sports? And they asked for my view. And I said, look, based on my experience, trying to get into broadcasting for many years, and luckily I've got the platform now, but it was tricky to get in. And it was at a time where it felt very much like a boys' club. I remember being told once when I was cutting my teeth through student radio by a boss of a station that, look, you should feel fortunate working here, because if not, you'd be sweeping the streets. So.
Wow. Well, I remember something very similar. I remember being told by a boss years ago that I would never cross over. Now, you might wonder what I would be crossing over from. And that was that I was Jewish, and so I better just stay in my lane, and I better be very, very pleased to present one Jewish programme a week and not to even dream or think about crossing over, because how could you possibly, if you were Jewish, be lucky to present a Jewish programme?
Vanessa, you've proved them wrong. And I'm glad that you've certainly, if they're watching this now, I'm sure they'd be embarrassed. And the problem it's the mindset. And this is the issue, which has cropped up again with Hester's comments, where there is a minority who have that mindset and think that, well, certainly their power, they're inferior to everybody. And if those people, very powerful, middle-class, affluent, white males who can say comments and say things like that. And this is where it needs to be stamped out, that you can't say things like that because we're not living in those
But tell me something,
treacherous
Edward.
times.
You know, very often on this programme, I'm going to bring in Charlie in a minute, obviously, very often on this programme we talk about lawlessness. We talk about, for example, if your house is burgled, if your phone is stolen, if your place of work is broken into, the chances, and if you're a woman and you're sexually assaulted, the chances are that they will not find the perpetrator, and they're very unlikely to look very hard or very carefully for the perpetrator. So people are saying effectively there are whole areas and arenas of life where lawlessness prevails because they're never going to bring the criminal to book. And so, they've pretty much got carte blanche. Another big one these days is shoplifting, where we know that if you shoplift something that's under £200 in value, pretty much you get a pat on the back and sent on your merry way. There's no kind of comeback for people who do this kind of a thing. So because of that, some people might be wondering, is it worth police investigating Frank Hester? We know what he's alleged to have said. The whole country's got a view on it. Is it worth using police time, using police resources to research what a multi-millionaire said in a meeting at his work in 2019? Do you think this is a good use of money?
Well, Vanessa, if somebody said that on the bus and if they were allowed to get away with it, what does that say about us as a society, that we're allowing that form of language? And to be fair, it's a form of the government now talking about clamping down on extremism by saying that. His comments was in reference to every black woman in this country. And it's a shocking thing. No one should ever say that. So if we allow one person to get away with it, whether it should be investigated or taken further, in a sense, if nothing is done about it, and this kind of rhetoric of people saying, well, we need to move on. In a sense, if we're saying it has to be moved on, we're saying that we are endorsing racism.
Do you think the money should be given back? It certainly hasn't been given back, and the Prime Minister's got no intention of returning it, but do you feel it should be given back? And B, do you think Hester should be prosecuted for hate speech or inciting racism or something of that kind?
I'm going to start with the second point and go back to the first point, because me sometimes I'm a bit complicated. Okay. I think when it comes to whether the prosecution, that's a matter of the police. Clearly, if they've got the facts and the evidence, and if they deem it to be, well, racist or extremist or in that context, then by all means they should take the matter further. When it comes down to the money, I think, again, that's down to the Conservative. It's down to common sense and I think and logic. And I think the party probably may have to think twice, because the electorate will think, well, look, they may perceive it to be dirty money. And they will say, well, look, dirty money is being used to fund a party or an electoral campaign. So I think it's up to the Conservative Party whether they actually want to keep the money. That's down to them.
Edward, thank you. I'm going to move on to Charlie. Thank you very much, Edward. So Charlie, obviously you've been listening to all of this. Now, Rishi Sunak said various things along the way as this story unfolded. One was, well, Frank Hester has shown remorse. He's really donated remorse along with the money. So therefore, we don't have to give the money back because he's very sorry and he wishes he hadn't said it. Frank Hester eventually did apologise for having said it, although he maintained it had nothing to do with the colour of Diane Abbott's skin or the fact that she was a woman, even though that's precisely what he said, so that's quite difficult to possibly believe. And then Rishi Sunak said, well, it's enough of this already. We've kind of had enough of this conversation. We're keeping the money. Obviously, he's sorry. Let's move on. Nothing to see here. But this story isn't going away, as Edward says, and it was being suggested at the beginning that, people wouldn't like it, that the electorate wouldn't like it, that they would remember it, a bit like the Dominic Cummings thing that never went away. Everyone kept remembering it, kept talking about it, and that the electorate will say, well, what's paid for this campaign? Is it dirty money, as Edward rightly says? This must be a cause of consternation at number 10, mustn't it?
I think it will be, and I think, look, regardless of whether the Tory party gives the money back, this is something that the Labour Party, or any other political party for that matter, will want to continue to remind the country of, that this is someone who has donated to the Conservative Party or has been a Conservative supporter. Now, I'm a Conservative supporter. I think those comments were disgusting, deplorable. They absolutely were racist.
Yeah.
So it's right that there's been an apology. I don't personally see how it would benefit giving £10 million back to already a multi-millionaire, ultimately rewarding him for making those comments. I think the money could either, if it's already been spent, then I think the Conservative Party can articulate that it accepted that money in good faith. The comments were made years ago. The Tory party obviously wasn't aware that those comments had been made. So I think it's perfectly legitimate to explain that why they're keeping the money, but they should absolutely disassociate themselves with Mr Hester going forward. And of course, we'll have to wait and hear about the extra £5 million, whether that's been actually sort of given to the party, because that will be declared in the usual way through the register of interest that all political parties have to sign up to. But you're right, it goes to a broader point about society and politics and diversity and culture and what kind of country we want to be in. And I think those comments, as I say, were absolutely deplorable and disgusting. They were racist, and it was right for Kemi Badenoch and others to then call Mr Hester out for them.
So then you wonder about the judgment call, don't you? You wonder whether it would have been better for the Prime Minister and the party to bite the bullet immediately, for him to say immediately. And you might think almost instinctively, oh, my God, this is awful. This is a horrible thing to say. Wow, misogynistic, violent, racist, utterly inappropriate, not something with which the Tories want to have any truck whatsoever, and at great personal cost to us. In an election year, we're sending back the money. And also, if we're honest about these kind of things, Rishi Sunak and his wife have a combined, income of literally, isn't it, over £1 billion or something like that of personal wealth. If he needs to drum up 10 million from somewhere, he can surely manage to do it from somewhere else, rather than kind of wade away in the shallows with Frank Hester, where it's looking, as Edward says, worse and worse every minute.
Well, that is a very valid point, and but I think the party has to continue to function. It has to field candidates. It has to put training in place. It has to continue to run, and it is obviously scaling up. Every political party is scaling up in the run-up to the general election. Of course, we've got local elections coming in just a few weeks' time, on the 2nd of May. So. I think the money might have already been spent, and therefore it's difficult then to try and cook the books in that sense. But I think the Prime Minister will want to be saying to the country, look, I'm the Prime Minister of the UK. I've got a hell of a lot of things going on. I've got so much in my in tray. We have a party, party chairman that could be dealing with party matters, but he's getting on and focused on the job in running the country.